Today's video is sponsored by Raycon. Earbuds are a must-have accessory for my workout routines. During the dark age, pre-Raycon era, I had to choose between quality and comfort. Raycon's everyday earbuds effectively provides both. Whether it be jogging or lifting weights, I can listen to podcasts, music, or even live coverage of the Raiders losing with crystal clear sound quality. And I don't have to tear up the inside of my ear canal to do it. Raycon have proven themselves to be a top contender in premium audio. From their everyday headphones to their everyday earbuds, Raycon provides quality products at an affordable price. But like with every great team, there's always room for new talent, and Raycon has added new additions to their lineup by expanding into home and power tech. Remove all that disgusting filth from your water supply with Raycon's new faucet filter, or charge up all your devices with the Magic 180 Cable Pro. With all-in-one compatibility with iOS, micro USB, and Type-C devices. So as you're probably already aware, the day after Gobble Gobble Day is where a bunch of Karens get together at the local mall and fight over 15% off handbags, better known as Black Friday. These discounts are to die for. Well, guess who else is having a sale? That's right, Raycon. Oh my god, you guys are so smart. Shop Raycon's I almost said Black Monday. Oh my god. Shop Raycon's Black Friday and Cyber Monday sales for their biggest holiday discounts yet. Raycon is also offering limited time tech kit bundles, like the Fitness Audio Kit and the Everyday Audio Kit. These are just two of many that you can choose from, so select one that best suits your needs. But remember, these holiday discounts won't last forever. So make sure you seal the deal by November 27th. Go to buyraycon.com/522 and get up to 50% off site-wide. Big thanks to Raycon for supporting my channel. Links will be in the description. Back in 2007, we moved into a new house. It had been taken off the rental market because the previous tenant trashed it. But they were fixing it up, and we were happy to find somewhere that was within walking distance to everything. But after a while, strange things began to happen. Underwear and bras went missing. We kept seeing someone walking through our backyard. A bench had been moved to under our son's bedroom window. We padlocked all the gates, but we kept seeing this person walking through our yard. Then one night, when my husband was away on a work trip, I could hear someone outside the house. They had gotten to the fuse box, and soon I was sitting in the dark with my 2-year-old son. Well, I could hear someone outside laughing like a maniac while striking the front door. Of course, I called the police, but it took them 6 hours to get there. They dismissed it as a prank and couldn't do much. It really shook the trust I had in the police. In the following 3 months, we had attempted break-ins, and we couldn't work out why. At the time, we were young parents and had very little of value. We took precautions and had our son sleep in our room. We lived in constant fear and never really felt safe there. One night, we heard someone trying to open our son's bedroom window. This time, we drew back the blinds and saw a face. When the intruder couldn't open the window, he then proceeded to start hitting the glass over and over again. trying to force his way inside. We called the police, and I was able to give a full description of the intruder, but again it took hours before they turned up. While we were talking to the officers in the driveway, the female officer informed us there was a light on underneath the house. It was a storage area we had put things in the day we moved in, and had not gone in there since, and certainly had not seen that light on in the time we'd been there. They go and investigate, and found basically a bed made out of our old moving boxes, with some of my missing underwear and bras, and a stack of our son's toys and clothing. He had been living under the house. The police told us to padlock the door to the storage area, and left. It was some time later, the former landlord found out it may have been the old tenant who had been evicted before we bought the place. It took me maybe another 6 months to feel safe even hanging the laundry on the lines, due to the fact it was right next to the door. Even now, many years later, I still don't like storage areas, and never really feel safe around them. For the sake of the story, you can call me Philip. I was 26 years old at the time. For context, I love traveling solo whenever I can. One of my favorite countries to visit is France. In February of 2019, I went to France and stayed in a town called Nantes. It's a settlement about 2 hours away from Paris, if you travel by a high-speed train. I really like this town. It's very scenic and always very lively, even during the winter months. I stayed there for about a month, and unlike most foreigners, I didn't just stay in the main tourist areas. I often took buses that would drive me to the outskirts of the town, so I could explore the more secluded areas. One night, at around 5 p.m., I took a bus to leave Nantes and got off at a random stop and aimlessly walked around a neighborhood. It was so peaceful and quiet. It definitely was not like this back home. I eventually came across a small forest. Once I entered, I soon came to a lake. I sat on a bench for a while and enjoyed the natural sanctuary. Suddenly, I felt the atmosphere drop, and I heard footsteps nearby. The sun was beginning to set, and it was already getting dark out here, so I couldn't see who was approaching me. The situation instantly made me nervous. I then heard a deep growl that made my hair stand up on end. I decided to get out of there right away, quickly making my way back the way I came from so I could catch the bus back to Nantes. But once I arrived at the bus stop, I discovered that I still had 40 minutes before it got there. So I stood there alone, staring out into the creepy forest, knowing that there was something that sounded like an animal lurking somewhere nearby. I was on edge, to say the least. In the distance, I saw a tall figure emerging from the trees. Soon after seeing it, I heard a cranking sound. "Get the fuck out of here," I said, not believing what was happening. I had an inkling of what the person was doing, but my worst fear was confirmed when I heard a chainsaw firing up. The figure then lifted it above its head and screamed. Then began charging toward me. Sweat poured down my face as my feet hit the ground. This was life or death, and slowing down could have meant the end. I was being chased by a chainsaw-wielding lunatic down a dark back road in France. A short time later, I saw a pair of headlights in the distance. By some miracle, a car was driving down the road, going in the opposite direction. The buzzing immediately ceased, and the figure disappeared back into the forest. The driver stopped and asked me what was going on. I tried my best to explain to him in my broken French, and he told me to get into his car. We then drove to a local police station and made a report, but since the French police are not very competent, and I don't think they even believed my story, I kind of figured that they weren't going to bother to do anything, and I haven't heard back from them since. The driver dropped me off at a tram station afterward. I thanked him, and he told me to be very careful next time, and said that France is not the paradise that people think it is, and there are dangers everywhere in the country. I still like to go exploring in the more secluded areas, but from now on, I only do it during the day. I grew up in a forested area, and I felt quite comfortable there most of the time. Nevertheless, I've stumbled into a few unsettling situations there that will firmly stick with me forever. This is one such occasion. I was 18 at the time. One evening, me and my two friends, Mike and Paul, decided to go camping. Well, maybe camping isn't the right word, since we didn't intend to spend the night, only to chill out and have some fun around the campfire for a while. The plan was simple: head out, build a fire, drink a few bottles of wine, eat something, and then head back home for a good night's sleep. We all met at my house when it was still sunny outside. We got ready and soon headed out. Our destination was this old abandoned quarry in the middle of the forest, which was maybe 40 minutes from my house. Even though this quarry has a tragic and frankly creepy history, it's a popular place to hang out. When we got there, the sun was already slowly setting behind the hills. We quickly gathered all the firewood we could, so we didn't have to look for it later. As darkness fell and draped all of our surroundings into impenetrable blackness, we all managed to get the fire going. We were in good spirits, and were getting ready for our first toast. That is when we realized we had made a horrible mistake. We had forgotten the corkscrew. We were trying to open the bottle without it, but we quickly gave up. The bottles were quite expensive, and we didn't want to damage them. At this point, it was clear that one of us would have to sacrifice himself and jog back to retrieve the corkscrew. After a bit of back and forth, I volunteered. However, I had two conditions. Firstly, they would give me a hatchet in case something went wrong along the way, and second, no pranks when I got back. Mike and Paul agreed without hesitation. They shoved the hatchet into my one hand and a flashlight into another, and sent me on my way. As I was jogging through the forest, I heard a noise resembling a wild boar. I suddenly remembered a warning I received from an older hunter a few days ago. He said it was around this time of year. Boars get very dangerous, especially at night. I was a bit nervous, but luckily I managed to survive without incident. I arrived safely back to my house, much to the surprise of my mother, who didn't expect me back so early. I explained the whole ordeal, and she just laughed. I grabbed the corkscrew and was now back on my way. Not wanting to experience the unpleasantness of a boar encounter, I chose another, slightly longer path, this time through an open field. After a while, I got to our spot. It was a small clearing bordered on one side by massive rocks, maybe 70 meters tall, and the other side was thick forest. Somewhere in the middle of the clearing was our campfire. When I approached it, I realized there wasn't anyone there, although our backpacks were still on the ground and the fire was burning bright. Great. We specifically agreed that there would be no pranks when I got back, and these dicks are trying to be funny, I thought to myself. I sat down near the fire while facing the woods. I wasn't in the mood for games, and I was getting quite upset. That's when I heard a snapping of twigs and the rustling of leaves from the edge of the forest, perhaps 30 meters away from where I was sitting. The sound was rhythmic, and it was undoubtedly someone making their way through the forest. I aimed my turned to me, and just kept staring motionlessly, even though he was directly facing me. I couldn't really see his face. "Paul, I know you're trying to scare me. We had an agreement, so stop messing around and come out." As I got done yelling, the hooded figure just turned around and walked deeper into the forest. Just then, my phone began ringing. Hastily, I took it out of my pocket. It was Mike. I answered the phone and immediately began barking at him. "Really funny, you assholes. I thought we had an agreement." What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about you trying to fuck with me. I clearly just saw you, so you can come out now." Mike didn't say anything for a minute. All I could hear on the other end was heavy breathing and Paul mumbling something in the background. When Mike finally snapped back to reality, he said, "Dude, we're at your house. We heard some footsteps, and at first we thought it was you trying to mess with us, so we decided to get up and go look for you. I forgot my phone at your house, so we couldn't even call you until just now. Get the hell out of there. We'll come back for our stuff later." "Bullshit. This is just another one of your stupid pranks, and I'm not buying it." Hold on a second." All I could hear from the other end was some incoherent mumbling. Then I heard my mom's voice. "Hey, what's going on?" My head was now spinning, and my heart skipped a beat as I realized they weren't joking. Suddenly, a freezing wave of fear ran through my entire body. However, I managed to convince my mom that everything was okay. This was all a misunderstanding, and she doesn't need to be worried. She gave the phone back to Mike. "Listen, just leave everything and come back. We're heading out now, and we'll meet you halfway there." "I'm not going anywhere alone. You better get your asses back here quick. I'll be waiting for you." "But..." I hung up. I didn't want to make any more noise than I already did. I quickly turned off my flashlight and started to back off from the campfire. I moved all the way to the huge wall of rocks. I figured that if the rocks were at my back, it would eliminate one of the possible ways this unwanted visitor could approach me. I was standing there, in complete darkness, trying not to make a sound while tightly clutching my hatchet, which for the next half hour would be my best friend. I had to constantly convince myself not to curl up into a ball. Even my own body started to betray me, as my hearing got worse due to my elevated heart rate. I was trying my best to calm myself down, but then again, worst case scenario, every bit of adrenaline would help. After what seemed like an eternity, I spotted 2 light beams coming from the forest, and I heard Paul shouting my name. I've never been so relieved in my life, and I finally ran out of my hiding spot and greeted my 2 friends. For quite some time, we were just standing there, laughing like a bunch of maniacs. We were even getting a bit cocky about staying. After all, it was just one creep lurking out in the woods, and there was 3 of us. It's funny, just minutes earlier I was shitting myself out of fear, and now I was suddenly full of masculine energy, thinking, what could possibly happen? But in the end, our better judgment prevailed, and we packed our things, put out the fire, and left. We took our bottles of wine to enjoy elsewhere, somewhere nice and brightly lit. I'm a female, 24 years old, from the United Kingdom. Despite a few creepy instances as a child, there has only been one time in my adult life that I have truly felt primal fear. My apologies if this is a bit long, but trust that I am being as concise as possible and need to explain the surroundings a bit. I live in a village in the middle of the English countryside. To paint an accurate picture of its size, it has a population of 4,000, but it feels more like 1,000 due to its spread out nature and being surrounded on all sides by fields, farms, and forest. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, and because of this, it has notoriously bad phone and internet connections. Having lived here my entire life, I know the place like the back of my hand. I know all of the public footpaths through the forest and fields, where they connect, which are shortcuts, and where to cross deep streams, etc. I've gone on walks in this area throughout my childhood with my parents, and alone as an adult. Nothing bad has ever happened, and I always felt safe. This story took place last summer in July. After I moved back home from university, I had yet to get a job and smoked a lot of weed, a habit that my parents despised, which I tried to keep hidden from them by going on evening walks. I would have multiple pre-rolled joints hidden away in my hoodie pocket. As usual this day, I got home at 5 p.m. We had dinner, but my mom and I chatted for a lot longer than usual. She had had quite a hectic day and was telling me all about it. Because of this, I ended up heading out for my walk than I normally do, around 7 p.m. But this was summer and the sun was still shining, so honestly, I didn't really consider that it would start getting dark while I was still out. The woods closest to my house is less than a 5-minute walk away, and you enter through a gate into a farmer's field. You can see across the open area quite far, until the first set of trees obscures your view. That's where I was heading, as I knew that this track takes under 2 hours to traverse, and led back to the same path I was standing on now. More than enough time to smoke a couple of joints and for the smell to leave my clothing. This entire area is very popular for dog walkers, so it's not unusual to see other people while you're out and about. And since this is a village community, everyone says hello. I lit my first joint and began walking. I'm just in my own world for a while, until I was less than 100 feet from entering the forest. An elderly man was coming out, throwing a ball to his dog. I finished my joint and stubbed it out. As I got closer, I recognized it was a neighbor of mine who lived on the road next to mine. He was also friends with my grandfather. We stopped and said hello as I pet his dog, Max. While talking, I see another man emerging from the woods. He had no dog and was wearing a bright green jacket, very tall, and had at least 10 years on me age-wise. John and I chatted for another minute before saying our goodbyes. He warns me not to stay out here for too long, as it would start getting dark soon, which was true. The sky was bright pink and orange, and the sun was indeed beginning to set. I continued down the path towards the man. When we were nearly passing each other, I looked up to make brief eye contact, smile, and say hello, like everybody here does, even if you didn't recognize the person. My eyes instantly met his. He was already looking at me. His dark eyes were locked on mine. He wasn't smiling. I didn't know him at all, but I knew something was wrong. It was in his eyes. I swallowed my politeness and looked at the ground as we passed. I had lived in my university city the past couple of years, so I knew a red flag when I saw one, and my country bumpkin manners evaporated. I quickened my pace, quickly glancing behind me. The guy was still walking in the same direction following John. I felt relieved, laughed, and cursed the weed for making me paranoid, while lighting up another joint, and advanced further into the woods. It took about 30 minutes to follow the path through the woods to the end. The pathway exit opens into another field that led to another set of woods. The sky was now violet, and the dimming light had been obscured to me by the trees. I was smoking my last joint and was near the entrance of the second set of woods when I felt it. Fear. Crippling, absolute fear worked its way like electricity, coursing through every layer of flesh. Standing at the exit of the first set of woods was the man. I could make out his green jacket in the dying light. He had doubled back, and quickly too. I looked behind me several times while I was in those trees, and he hadn't been there. For a second I froze, as did he. He knew that I was onto him. To sprint the distance between us would take him about 5 minutes. He was obviously in good shape. So I wasted no time and bolted into the second forest. It was the only way I could go, and I dare not look behind me. I sprinted for a couple of minutes before taking a sharp left turn, hoping to throw him off a bit, but I couldn't see a fucking thing. It was already beginning to get dark, and the trees made it 100 times worse, like fingers whipping and scratching at my bare legs so badly that I began to bleed. My lungs began to protest in pain, hating me for smoking so much before all this, while my heart was throwing itself against my ribcage, trying to escape. I couldn't run anymore, and I threw myself on the ground behind a very large tree. My back was against it, knees to my chest, hand over my mouth to stifle my labored breathing, as I desperately tried to pump air into my lungs for the next sprint. I listened for the first time. A few seconds pass. Then, I heard him. Heavy footfall snapping twigs about 20 feet behind me, but I dare not look in case he saw me. I had my phone on me, but I knew there was little chance of getting a signal out here, and I also knew he would either hear me talking or see the light from my screen. I'm not ashamed to admit that at this point, I began to cry, tears falling silently down my face. "What the fuck? Where are you? I know you're here," I heard a deep voice say. I had to clasp both hands over my mouth to stop my scream from escaping. I can hear him moving around. I panic and found the courage to carefully peek out from behind the tree. He was about 10 feet away, with his back to me. I moved back, my eyes scanning the area around me. I found a heavy rock and picked it up. I carefully checked on him again. He was still facing the opposite direction, but he was searching through the trees, hunched down lower to the ground. I made a snap decision, and with everything I had left, I threw the rock to the right. It crashed through some branches and made one hell of a noise. I watched him immediately bolt in its direction, laughing like a fucking psycho, and listened to his footsteps fade away until I thought I wouldn't be visible to him if I moved. I ran, trying to put as much distance between us as possible, but I was also aware that I was getting further and further away from my house. I knew that there had to be a stream somewhere close. If I found it, I could follow it, as it ran parallel to some of the trails. I ran until the trees finally cleared. Then, the ground disappeared from beneath my feet, and I go head over shoulders down the stream embankment, crashing into the water below. My mouth was open and was being filled with muddy water. As I spat it out, I felt both relieved that I had found the stream, but then terrified that I had just gave away my position, and my phone was now ruined. I slowly made my way downstream, as quietly as I could, listening for him the entire time as the stream runs through the woods. I kept looking up periodically just in case. After maybe a half an hour, I noticed the trees began to thin out and realized that I was at the very edge of the forest now, where I would be able to exit onto a pathway that connected to the one that I had taken to get here. If I ran, I could make it home in less than 20 minutes. I dragged myself on my stomach back up the embankment, army style, wanting to stay as low as possible. I peeked over the top, and I could just make out the opening of the woods. about 50 feet away. I then began to scan the forest line for a couple of minutes, my eyes trying to make out any movement, despite it now being almost pitch black. I couldn't see or hear anything, so I pushed myself up and sprinted as fast as I could across the field onto the pathway. I knew the gate I had entered through was now a short distance away. I was so relieved.
"You fucking bitch!"
came a screech from across the field. I swear my lungs almost gave out right then and there. He had been waiting for me. I turned my head and saw him sprinting out of the woods, coming right for me. I screamed and pushed myself further, tears coating my face. All I could do was run. I could now see the moonlight shining off the metal gate. My house was just 5 minutes away after that. He was faster than me and getting closer, screaming at me the whole time. I ran as fast as I could, pushing myself over the gate and ran up the road. I looked behind me as my house came into view. He was still following me. I raced up my driveway and threw myself through the door, running into the living room, crying and screaming hysterically. Pointing behind me towards the door, my dad ran outside while my mom grabbed a hold of me as I collapsed, shaking. It turns out that my parents had already called the police, as I said I would be gone for an hour, and that was at 7 o'clock. It was now past 12 a.m. I hadn't answered when they called because my phone was broken, and they became concerned. We called the police again and explained. They came and I gave my full statement. Both my parents and the police were horrified. Nothing like this ever happens around here. There hasn't been a reported rape or murder in the past 100 years, but one look at me and it was obvious that I was telling the truth. I was covered from head to toes in cuts and bruises, soaking wet, caked with mud and my own blood. I'm not going to go into how this experience changed me. It's quite depressing. But I will say that the thing that scares me the most is that they never even came up with a suspect. Despite him following me so closely, he was gone by the time my dad ran outside. And I'm left wondering, is that man still out there? And who knows what he is truly capable of? I am a 33-year-old female living in Fort Washington, Pennsylvania. I work as a graphic designer. My husband, who I will refer to as Dave, is the same age as me. This happened in 2018, when we were 27. This was the year that my husband and I rented a 3-bedroom house together. This was also the year that I started my graphic design career and got my first job. Most of my coworkers were nice and helpful. However, there was a guy named Max who became the reason that I'm submitting this story. From the moment I first met him, he gave me the creeps, and I never cared to interact with him. I admit that I'm very socially selective. I can like some people while not giving a damn about others. But still, I couldn't just ignore the uncomfortable feeling I had around him. It all started when we had to do a major project. Our demanding boss didn't give us a choice when it came to who we had as partners. So of course, I was stuck with Max. At first, I was somewhat okay with this. He was very good at his job, but his inner creep began to reveal itself as time went on. He would ask me about where I lived, where I grew up, what my nationality was, what kind of car I drove, and where I used to study. I always tried to change the subject and focus on the work at hand. I even asked my boss if I could be partnered with somebody else, but the grumpy old man told me to suck it up, and his goal was for everyone to get along, because he doesn't tolerate social discrimination. Whatever the hell that means. Max tried hard to be the nice guy. He would try inviting me to his place. He would buy me lunch when I never asked for it. And he would say things over text message like, "I can't wait to see you tomorrow," It was good seeing you today. You are very pleasant to work with. Ugh, cringe. I try not to think too much into it, but over time he began to get on my nerves. One day, my car broke down. The clutch needed to be replaced, so on that day, my husband had to pick me up. When he showed up, I got into his truck and greeted him. When that happened, I noticed that Max, who was also outside, had a very angry look on his face. It was the kind of look that a toddler makes when you take away their toys. But seeing it on a grown man was unsettling. Dave joked around and said, "Well, it looks like you broke your work husband's heart." I tried to lighten up the mood and responded with, "Oh, I feel so bad. I'm such a terrible work wife." But deep down, I knew that I still had to work with this obsessed weirdo on the final part of the project, and I dreaded going back to work the next day. When my husband dropped me off the following morning, I got out of my truck and noticed that Max was glaring at my husband. I will admit that Dave did antagonize him a bit, but Max was staring at him like Ted Bundy at a sorority house. My husband laughed at him and drove away. Later on, Max quietly told me in a low, angry voice, "You know I've been trying to be nice to you, but you've been nothing but rude to me, and your fucking husband better watch his back. Well, I didn't even want to work with you to begin with, so go fuck yourself." I decided to quit my job on the spot after getting scolded by my boss. I couldn't take being teamed up with a mentally unstable creep and having to listen to some old, out-of-touch boss condescend to me about getting along with others. No, some people you just can't get along with.